So let's talk about our scenario that's going to give us that context that we're going to use for the duration of this Server 2008 course. So we're going to pretend that you're a consultant, okay? And as that consultant, you've recently been retained by a new startup company, Verde Petra Perks and Publishing, a coffee shop chain that not only serves coffee, but also uses print-on-demand technology to deliver soft-cover books from a library of the most recent 2,500 to 3,000 bestsellers or so. Each coffee shop franchise and corporate-owned location is going to be fully equipped with the standard, coffee, espresso, iced latte equipment, but they're also going to have touchscreen kiosks at each table that will allow customers to order their drinks as well as order books that will be printed right in the coffee shop itself in about 5 minutes using a new machine called the Espresso Book Machine. And really, it's basically just a big print device. The web application software that's going to be used for ordering coffee, snacks, and books, it's still in development by another agency, but it's your job to build out the initial network infrastructure for this pilot coffee shop, which is also going to serve as the initial headquarters for the chain. Now, the owners, who are tech-savvy coffee gurus, have opted to go with Server 2008 as the platform of choice, largely due to some really cool things. Let me scroll down, make sure we got everything right here in the middle of the screen. Enhanced IIS 7.0 capabilities and modularization to support their internal ASP web applications going to be used for collecting orders. Then, as well as branch office support and security through server core installation, read-only domain controllers, and web access to remote apps. This is going to be pretty critical because they're going to have franchises and other corporate-owned locations, hopefully, all around the United States and perhaps even all over the world. And so we need to make sure that we have technology in place that we can help to manage these different locations in terms of IT and in terms of their storage requirements and other business critical elements like reporting and such as that. So we want to make sure that though we have those things, and there's some really neat elements in Server 2008 that's going to help us to do that. Then of course we're going to need to have print server capabilities for book printing because, well, it's one of those things that is going to make our lives a little easier. File server capabilities for book storage. That's one of those really easy with things to implement, and I'm sure a lot of you have already implemented file servers in the past. But there's some cool things that are new in Server 2008 we're going to talk about in relation to helping out Verde Petra Perks and Publishing. And then last, one of the huge things that in Server 2008 that's moved the owners towards this is Windows deployment services. Remember, I was telling you that Server 2008 and Vista are now image-based installations, and we have actually WDS native support for this image-based type of installations. So you don't necessarily need third-party software to do imaging anymore. It's actually built right into Server 2008. And that's going to be key, especially as they start to add more franchises and more corporate-owned locations, that they have an easy way to walk into a shop, set up some machines, image them out, and then have almost kind of a shop-in-a-box type of installation, type of setup. Let me give you a picture of what this is going to look like at the end. We start with an Active Directory domain controller that also has DNS on it, and this is what we're actually going to install in this video. We're going to get to that in just a few moments. We're going to be installing read-only domain controllers, and that's really more for replication and ease of management. You're going to find out that those are really cool. A terminal services server. There's some really neat branch office capabilities that you can use for things like reporting, things like managing software, things like all kinds of really neat stuff there in terminal services. We're going to be installing a Server Core 2008 DHCP server in a future video as well in this series. And then, of course, we have to have a web server on premises in order to handle our ASP internal web application. We're going to have a file and print server going that's going to be directly connected to our Espresso Book Machine. And that's going to be key to the whole order and delivery process and vision of Verde Petra Perks and Publishing. We're going to be setting up a Windows Deployment Services box that's going to be mobile. And the question at this point is this going to be on a laptop or is this just going to be on a box that's easily transportable? That's a question that You know, if we have a laptop that's powerful enough, absolutely. If it's got enough storage space, I say we can probably go ahead and put a Server 2008 on a laptop and set it up so that we can walk into a shop, have all of our machines physically set up, plug in our laptop, and then blow out images to all the different boxes that we're going to need for this particular installation. Now, we are going to have at least 12 Vista client machines in the shop. We're going to have 10 on the floor, and we're going to reserve 2 of those machines for behind-the-counter use. So we have some place to receive orders. So as people are sitting at the tables, they punch in the order at the table. That order gets sent to the web application and then gets spit back out on one of those behind-the-counter machines. The staff can then put together the order and then take it out to that particular customer. So we'll reserve 2 of those. Of course, we have to have an internet connection. We're also going to have a wireless router for laptop users, and we're also going to have an appliance that is going to handle a lot of our internet access and wireless router usage as well. That's stuff that we really don't have to mess with that much. That's going to be handled by another party. What we're going to be focusing on in this particular series, we're going to be focusing on this side. We're going to be focusing on the internal side of the router. We're not going to mess with all of that. And then we're also going to be concerning ourselves with setting up an image for Vista client machines. So these are the 2 areas that we're really going to be focusing on in terms of this video. Now, I do have a variety, I do have this stuff listed out here in the notes, and I have it typed out here. I'm not going to cover this because I've just talked about all of this, but I do want to mention that a main focus for this pilot installation is to make this network replicable and scalable for future franchises. So one of the key elements that we're going to be focusing in on is image creation for Windows deployment services. That's going to be really important. Now, to kind of wrap up our little overview on this scenario, you're not an expert in 2008 as you approach this project, but as you all know, when you get into it, you're about to become one. All right, so now let's go ahead and let's talk about, real quickly, the different editions and the requirements, just to make sure that the box is ready. So we got all kinds of different flavors of Server 2008. Now, these are going to be probably very familiar to these top 3. We have the Standard Edition, Enterprise Edition, and Data Center Edition. Very comparable to what we saw with Server 2003, and most of you are going to be using these 3 editions. There is also a Web Server Edition that its sole purpose is to handle IIS 7.0. We do have an additional item here, Windows Storage Server, again, primarily for SAN, storage area networks. Then there's 2 items that are going to be for small to medium businesses. Small Business Server 2008, a lot of you are familiar with Small Business Server 2003. Very similar type of operating system, not out yet. We don't have a lot of specifics about this at the time of recording. And also Windows Server Codename Centro for medium markets that are going to have, it's going to be kind of an all-in-one scalable box. It's also going to provide email services. It's going to have Exchange integrated into it, all kinds of really cool things. But again, at the time of this recording, we don't have a lot of information about that. And there's also going to be a version of Server 2008 for Itanium-based systems that use the 64-bit Itanium processor. Now that we know just a little bit about the different flavors, we need to talk about making sure that your box is ready. Hard disk space, they say the minimum is 10 gigabytes, but let's get real. Can you ever really have too much hard drive space? No, I don't think so. So, coach's recommendation, as much hard disk space as you can get. In terms of processors, you should have at least 1 gigahertz, but again, recommended is 2 gigahertz plus. RAM, Microsoft says you can get away with 512 megabytes. And yeah, you can, as long as no one's actually using the server. So make sure, I'm going to highly recommend that you have at least 2 gigabytes. And I want to let you know that the Server 2008 Standard Edition actually has a limit of 4 gigabytes. So we actually have some maximum limits that we need to pay attention to. So if you have a server box that has 64 gigabytes of memory and you install Standard Edition, well, you're only going to be able to use 4 gigs of that. So one of those things that we'll talk about more in the future course. But just to kind of give you a quickie idea of what's required. You know, a DVD drive, you know, that's kind of a dust statement because you're probably going to be installing from a DVD. And without a DVD drive, that's a little difficult. Okay, moving on. A network card, well, that's a blinding flash of the obvious because, well, if you don't have a network card and you're not installing this on a network box, what's the point of having server, right? Okay, so that's just a quick check on the additions and a quick check of the requirements. Let's go ahead and get into the installation, huh? So I'm going to switch on over to a virtual machine right now that has been booted up using the Server 2008 install ISO of the DVD. And so I'm going to walk you through this installation process real quick. You're going to find out that the initial install is very easy. I'm going to click on Next here. And now I'm going to click on Install Now. And I'm just going to sit here and spin for just a little bit. Now it's going to ask me for a product key for activation. I'm not actually going to use a product key for this one. I'm going to use the evaluation license that lets me use this free for 30 days. And I'm actually using the Release Candidate 0 edition of Server 2008 for this recording. I'm just going to click on Next. And it's going to ask me, do you want to enter your product key now? No, I don't. Right. Which edition of Windows did I purchase? Well, I didn't purchase any of them because, well, right now it's not available for purchase, but I'm going to install the Enterprise Edition, a full installation right now, because this initial box that we're going to be working on is going to be the domain controller for this network. So I'm going to be using the Enterprise. Could I use Standard? Sure. Could I use Data Center? Sure. But I'm going to go kind of with the mid-tier here, and I'm going to tell it I have selected the edition of Windows that I purchased, even though I'm kind of lying. All right, so go ahead and tell it Next, and tell it to accept the license terms, and tell it Next. Now, if I was going to install this over the top of Server 2003, I would have the option to upgrade, but that's not the case here. I'm going to click here on Custom, and now I get to select which hard disk, if I have multiple, then I'm going to be installing this on. I'm going to be installing on the only disk that I have in the list, and tell it Next. And now we sit back and we enter into the Microsoft Minute. Now, friends, rather than make you sit here and wait and watch with me, I'm actually going to be pausing the video. What's going to happen is it's going to sit here and run through a few things, and then it's going to restart. So as soon as the computer restarts, I'm going to come back, bring you back into the recording, and we will go again. Our computer has restarted, and so here we are once again. We are at the Windows Server 2008 Enterprise installation screen. We're going to tell this OK to change our initial password for the administrator. And so I'm just going to put in a generic password here real quick, and away it goes. I'm going to tell this OK. It's going to sit here and spin for just a little bit more, and then we're going to be presented with the initial configuration tasks. The initial configuration task list is really pretty nice because it's no more hunting and searching out for these little odd items that a lot of times we forget to do as we do installations. So in just a moment here, that will pop up for us. There we go. And it's all very basic, small things. All right, so what we're going to do first is we're going to alter the time zone. And so I'm going to switch this time zone over to Chicagoland time, since that's where your friendly neighborhood instructor is at. And we'll tell it OK. And OK again. And now to configure the networking. All right, I'm going to double click here on the local area connection and then go into its properties. Now, by default, we do have IP version 6 enabled, but just so you know, if you're not going to use IP version 6 in your network, just turn it off. You know, there's no reason for it to be on if you're not going to use it. You can always easily turn it back on later. All right, so I'm going to go here to the IP version 4 stuff, and I'm going to specify a static address. And so I'm going to use, whoops, let's turn on the number lock here. Use 192.168.5.1. 120. All right, I'm going to press tab and it'll specify the subnet mask for me, and then my default gateway is 0.5.1. Now, if you're playing along at home, by the way, if you've gone out and downloaded the RC, the release candidate version of Windows, you can specify and set up your addressing scheme however you like. All right, so preferred DNS server, and I'm going to be using the same router, at least initially, for my DNS, and now I can just tell it OK. So very quick, very easy stuff that I know that all of you have done out there 1.5 billion times. So I'm going to close that, and go back to the ICT. All right, so now I'm going to provide a computer name and domain. All right, so I'm going to go here to rename this computer and change its domain. Now, we don't have a domain set up just yet, so that's one of those things we will worry about later when we actually install the domain controller role. That will associate this computer, well, since it's the domain controller, with that domain automatically. So I'm going to call this guy Verde Petra DC. And I'm just going to leave it at work group for right now and tell it OK. No harm done, no foul at that point. Now I need to restart the computer to apply the change to the name. So I'm just going to tell that OK, and then let it restart the machine. And then as soon as it gets done restarting, I'm going to come back. I'm going to pause the recording right now while it reboots. All right, so here we are, and the machine has restarted once again. And so we'll just do a quick Control-Alt-Delete here. And now I'll log back in, and away we go. That should bring us back to the ICT initial configuration task list. Here we go. All right, so we have set up the first 3 items in our list. Now we can also decide whether or not we're going to do automatic updating and allow Microsoft to collect information about what's happening with our items. I'm going to go ahead and enable those just for simplicity's sake. Now those things may or may not be something you may want to do, especially if you are concerned about what Microsoft may have access to. So, and that's understandable. All right, so we don't need to download and install updates because I know that this is the latest edition of Server 2008. And so now we're at the point where we're going to start adding roles. Now, roles act and work a lot like they did in Server 2003. Now, we have some new ones, which is pretty cool. But everything is wizardized in this particular item. Now, we're going to be setting up a domain controller. And so what we need to do is we need to install the Active Directory Domain Services role. And this is going to install AD, users and groups, and all of that good stuff that most of you are already familiar with. So I'm going to tell it next. And it's going to say, hey, it's going to install DNS server on this role as well, yada, yada, yada. That's great. You can also find additional information here on ADDS. I'm just going to tell it next because, again, we're interested in getting this sucker up and running, right? And so now we're going to go ahead and tell it to install, and away it goes. So setting up an Active Directory domain controller, at least initially, is pretty easy. All we do is we walk through the wizard, and while it is installing the initial role installation, I'm going to go ahead and pause the video, and then as soon as it's done doing its thing, I'll be right back. So now the Active Directory Domain Services domain controller item has now been installed, and so we have this nifty link that's going to allow us to close this wizard and launch the Active Directory Domain Services install wizard, which is basically just dcpromo.exe. A lot of you are familiar with it. And we're just going to run this real quick, and you're going to find out that this is very simple at its basic level. I'm going to tell it next. I'm going to be creating a new domain in a new forest and tell it next. And now I'm going to put in the fully qualified domain name of the forest root. And so I'm going to put in here verdepetra.com and tell it next. It's going to check to see whether if it's anywhere else out of the network. It's not, because this is the first instance of a domain controller on this particular test network. So it's going to sit here and spin, and now it's going to ask us for the functional level. And basically the functional level is all dependent upon what kind of servers you have already running in your network. Well, we're going to be setting everything up in Windows Server 2008 exclusively because this is a brand new environment. And so we have a lot of advantages when we get to build something up from scratch rather than having to deal with all these other different kinds of servers. All right, so now I'm going to tell it next. It's going to sit here and spin, and now I need to also install the DNS server. It's going to do that for me automatically. All I have to do now is click on next. I get a little alert box here, and it's telling me, hey, we can't find a parent zone. I'm just going to have to tell it to continue. It'll be fine. And now it's going to ask me, do I want to place all of the different log folders, the database folder, sysvol, all that good stuff in different places? I'm going to leave it set to the defaults and tell it next. Now I need to set up a password for restore mode, so in case something weird happens, I can get back into the directory services restore mode and tell it next. And now we're going to go ahead and hit next again, and away it goes. I'm going to go ahead and have it reboot upon completion after it sits here and spins and does all of its installation tasks. And after that, we should be good to go. And then once again, while this is doing this, I'm going to pause the video and then come back as soon as it's finished doing its thing. And here we are again. Look, we have to restart and log on again. Well, there's a big surprise, right? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and log on. And now the Active Directory domain service, the domain controller, the DNS, everything is pretty much already set and installed, although we're going to have to do a little more configuration as we go in. And here we are back at the initial configuration tasks. And let's just double check and wait to see if it actually did load up that Active Directory domain controller and DNS role. And there we have it. Active Directory domain services, DNS server. You'll notice here that group policy management and remote server administration tools have also been installed. Let's go ahead and let's enable remote desktop real quick. And I'm going to run connections from computers running any version of remote desktop, mostly because this is on an internal test network and I don't have to worry about security that much. Although if I was probably in a real live environment, I may either not allow connections at all or allow connections only running remote desktop with network level authentication, which is more secure. Now, just so you know, you can also select the users who can be given access to the server. So we could, add some folks here. We can do this at any time. We don't have to do it right now. So I'm going to tell it to cancel those out. Whoops, I just canceled the wrong thing, didn't I? Let me go ahead and turn that back on. Tell it OK. It's really a checkbox. Or a radio button. Nothing to it. All right, so friends, everything is pretty much set up for that. And I can actually go ahead and close the ICT now because we're done with all of those configuration tasks. Now at this point, our next step would be to start working with this item inside of Server Manager. But at this point in time, everything is set up so we can start with the next task, which we're going to perform in the next video. So I'm going to go ahead and move out of the server now. Going to go back to our slides. And let's go ahead and let's talk about what we covered. So after viewing this video, you should now be able to describe at least a little bit about the different editions of Server 2008. You should be able to describe the minimum requirements for a full installation. You should be able to perform a full installation of Server 2008. We saw that it was really super easy. And wow, here come those initial configuration tasks. Ooh, those are toughies, right? And then, of course, installing that domain controller role is a piece of cake. It's all wizardized, and so much of what we need is done for us. So we really don't have to do a huge amount of configuration. We follow that wizard, restart a few times, and we're ready to go. So friends, thanks for hanging with me, and so I will see you in the next video.